All right, but everybody, welcome to Hardpoints. It's your podcast about energy, security, and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each week, we unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here, and let's get into it. Neil, how you doing today?
Doing all right. How about you, Mike?
I'm good. So you were in Phoenix this weekend, right?
I was. I went out there for Pat's Run. So when I was in grad school, I was privileged to win the Tillman Scholarship. So Pat Tillman was a football player. He gave up his football career to go into the military, joined the Army, and then was tragically killed by a blue-on-blue incident in 2004. His family set up a foundation that they raised millions of dollars, and their primary objective is to help military veterans transition. So when I was in grad school, I got a scholarship that also brought me into the world of the Tillman Foundation, and it's been one of the great honors of my life. Because I was sort of one of those anti-celebrity kind of people. I just never really thought being a celebrity was that notable or that worthy of my admiration. And so when I heard about Tillman, I sort of just assumed he was, a sort of fame-seeking kind of person. And so was initially not that excited to apply for the scholarship. But then somebody talked to me about it, and it turns out that I was completely wrong about him, that he was actually a very honorable person that really joined the military out of a deep conviction. So I do everything I can to support the foundation now, and that includes, I took the whole family out to Phoenix. We drove out there Friday. The race was Saturday morning. It was 99 degrees in Phoenix, which was pretty intense. My 10-year-old finished, which was awesome. I was sort of pushing both of them, my 7-year-old and my 10-year-old, to do it on their own. I had to carry my 7-year-old a little bit, but that's okay. He stuck it out, and then we spent the rest of the day in the pool. So it was a great weekend. Got to connect with some other Tillman scholars, some of the folks who work at the foundation, and it was really heartening to see so many people coming out to support the foundation and support the mission.
That's sounds like a kind of a red letter weekend, actually. A lot of fun. I mean, minus the running at 100 degrees in April, but
yeah, we survived. It was tough, but it was also good to challenge the boys. It's a 4.2 mile race, and for them that was just like mentally, can I do this? Am I able to do it? And so there was a lot of I got a lot of gratification out of, challenging them and then seeing them meet that challenge. Even if I had to help my 7-year-old a little bit, I carried him on my shoulders about, 10% of the time. But he hung in there, and he had a good time doing it.
That's awesome. No, there's always this point where, like, as a father, you want to challenge your kids, and but there's this borderline between am I teaching them grit, or am I just a bad parent?
There was some of that for sure. Is this a forced march, or are they going to be? Is this a character building experience? Right?
Yeah, we had last summer. We had my wife and 2 kids and I, the 4 of us, all climbed the kids' first 14er. So in Colorado, they have 50 some peaks that are 14,000 feet or taller. And so it's kind of a rite of passage for Colorado, and you got to go climb one of them at least, right?
Yeah, right on.
And so the kids decided they wanted to go do one. You get up, it's super early. Mount Bierstadt's pretty close to Denver, so you can drive up, kind of do a day trip. And anyways, so there's this, you put your foot, you go across this about a mile of flat, then it goes uphill pretty aggressively thereafter. And crossing this creek, it was September, and Ellen put her foot in the creek. And so her foot was cold and wet, and she was sobbing on the way up. And I was just oh God, should we turn around and but normally I'm the kind of guy that's I don't like a lot of people on the trail with me. It's just better to have your nature experience a little bit more isolated.
Mm-hmm.
But Mount Bierstadt's so accessible that there were quite a few people on the trail, going with us. And for once, I was really glad of it, because there was all these young women that were yeah, I remember crying with my dad too. It's totally okay, girl. Come on. And they were feeding her snacks, and there was this this sisterhood that just dragged her up the hill effectively.
Wow.
And
That's awesome.
yeah, but there was definitely this point where halfway up, I was like, maybe I should take her around. I even like took her foot out of her shoe and held it in my hands to try to kind of warm it up a little bit. And but she made it up there. So it's a little grit. She knows she can do it. My son knows he can do it. And now I'm mostly just going to have to try to keep up with them instead of the other way around.
100%. Very good.
Yeah. All right. Let's dig into some news that you need today. Today we've got batteries, big politics, and a surprising energy twist coming out of Texas. So let's start with the political hot potato. Bloomberg is reporting that the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations is on the chopping block. That's the same office in charge of funding major clean energy projects like hydrogen hubs, carbon removal tech, and long-duration batteries. The office was originally created under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act in 2021. And it's been overseeing billions in funding to jumpstart a lot of things in the energy and clean tech industry across the country. But the team decided that it was bloated and wasteful, or at least they say it was, and they wanted to scrap it. So they're cutting billions from the clean energy programs. This isn't exactly surprising. Trump, of course, ran on this, and his first term was full of proposals to slash clean energy spending. The difference now, though, is that the U.S. is really building this stuff at scale. So cutting that office could have a real chilling effect, not just on the projects, but on private investment that's been following these federal dollars. Some of the protected programs that are set to be transferred to other offices include those around hydrogen production and nuclear development, but batteries, direct air capture, and renewables are in the crosshairs. So if you're in energy tech, this has got some folks sweating. Shifting gears to our second story, there's a battery boom happening, and of all places, it's centered in Texas. Yep, oil country is now the national leader in grid-connected battery storage. According to Bloomberg, Texas is installing now more battery capacity per year than California is. There's a few reasons for this. First, the state's grid is independent and also very famously fragile, as we all learned about in the blackouts in 2021. So they've been pushing to stabilize the grid. Second, Texas is loaded, absolutely loaded based upon geography with wind and solar power. That means that there's a lot of cheap energy during the day, and batteries are the key to storing it when the sun sets or wind dies. Add in some successes around Texas, making it easier to connect projects to the grid compared to other states, and you've got that rapid battery growth. So even without that strict climate policy, Texas is becoming ground zero for energy storage. That's a big deal for grid resilience, energy markets, and the overall transition. Third story. Speaking of batteries, our last story is about a company you might not have heard of called Natron Energy. They just started production at their new battery factory in Michigan, and it's not your typical lithium-ion setup. Lithium is a difficult mineral to acquire. There's a lot of problems around its supply chain. So Natron is making sodium-ion batteries. That's right, no lithium, no cobalt, and a chemistry that's much cheaper and safer, even though it's not nearly as energy dense as lithium. Well, why does that matter? Well, global demand for batteries is going through the roof, as we talked about, even in Texas, and lithium prices are kind of going up and down all over the place. Sodium really could be a game changer. It's also super abundant. It's cheap, and it doesn't rely on the same energy chains that have been volatile lately. Now, sodium ions aren't going to replace lithium in EVs anytime soon, but for like stationary storage things, such as with Texas, things like backing up the grid, stabilizing renewables, it's a perfect fit. So the fact that this is being built in Michigan, which is classic manufacturing territory, it's a good look for U.S. industries trying to stay ahead of the curve. Now, that's your 5-minute fix on the news that you use. We're here to bring you the nuance with a little more chill and a lot less cable news energy. What do you think of those stories, Neil?
Yeah, the first one is disappointing. I mean, there's politics, and then look at the reality, man. Like, there's what I just said a few minutes ago about the load growth of data centers, electrification of demand for energy is growing. That's a well understood phenomenon. The data is clear, and in order to get through this period, this load growth over the next 25 years or so, it's not there's not a single source of generation that is going to solve everything. This is truly an all of the above energy approach, or we're going to end up with higher energy prices. And not only that, we're going to have less national security. So I am a firm believer in all of the above. And, I have green energy DNA for sure. But I also acknowledge that, energy is prosperity. And a lot of our prosperity has been gotten through fossil fuel generation, and that there is no sort of realistic path to just turning off the fossil fuel, oil and gas generation capacity overnight. And when I say overnight, I mean in the next 25 years. I know we'd like to do that. Some of us would like to do that, but it's just not realistic. So with this, shutting down OCED, it does is cripple some of the new generation capabilities that are coming into the market. There's, to dive really right into the heart of the matter, there's startups that get through several valleys of death, and especially in the new energy world, there are more valleys of death, meaning more opportunities for companies to fail because getting into the energy markets is really, really difficult. And in this case, OCED was addressing one of those valleys of death that would help energy technologies come to market. And by getting rid of it, you're going to drive energy prices up. You're going to reduce the options that we have available to us in the next 25 years, which means less national security. And you're not necessarily going to replace that with more oil and gas generation or other alternatives. We're just going to have less energy available to us. So I think this is a pretty short-sighted. I mean, clearly it's consistent with what Trump campaigned on and what we would expect him to do, but it's still disappointing to see.
Yeah, heck yeah. To me, it's kind of a false choice that we have to do one or the other. And I really hate false choices because they're usually intentionally created in order to benefit, a single side of the argument, rather than looking at kind of like the nuance of how this works. The thing that I think about with this is that like it's not like these industries are going to go away. It's what's going to happen is they're just going to go elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go again. The U.S. is going to have spent a lot of time and money to develop these nascent industries to rule the world, and we're going to ship them overseas so somebody else can. And it just seems like to cut off our nose to spite our face. So I find that very frustrating. Obviously, there's room for finding some cost efficiencies, but this is investment, and so sometimes investments take a long time to pay off, but they are super valuable. And so we've decided instead of investing, we're going to cost cut, and in places where that's really not where the costs are coming from all that much. So yeah.
And this is history repeating itself in some way too, right? A lot of my background is in wind energy, and in the 90s, the U.S. had the lead on wind energy technology. We did the first variable speed turbines, were the sort of pioneers of the three-bladed wind turbine that is so well known today. But the U.S. stopped investing in it in the early 2000s, and that meant that most of the tech development that happened in the early 2000s shipped to Europe. And now if you look at where the top wind companies are, 3 of the top wind companies are in Northern Europe, right? In Denmark and in Northern Germany. And the reason for that is Europeans picked up that R&D funding right as the U.S. was divesting from it. So instead of that industry sort of being built and grown here in the U.S., it got built and grown in Europe, and directly related to R&D funding that was available here in the U.S.
Yeah. It's not like these things are going to go away. They're not going to die. We're just letting it get away. Super frustrating. So we'll see
and
about
there's
that.
money to be made. So your second story was about batteries in Texas. The reason why batteries are going in Texas is because there's money to be made in those projects. And because ERCOT is operated in a certain way, which is more of a free market way of operating. It's an organized market where prices are flexible and prices go up and down, and therefore you can arbitrage. Batteries are super valuable right now in Texas and in California in particular, other places too, but in those two places in particular, because we've got a free market set up now in those quote unquote organized markets that allows you to benefit from batteries. And man, I actually got a buddy that just sold a big battery project. I mean, it's a $1 billion battery project. There's money to be made off of batteries, even if they're not paired with anything else.
Yeah, it's not. This isn't UNICEF. That's not charity. They're doing it because there's dollars to be made. My co-founder, his dad, they have a ranch. They homesteaded their family homesteaded in the Panhandle there in Texas, and he's been for a couple of years now been putting together a big solar project. A lot of reasons for it. Obviously, I can't get into too many of the details, but he's doing it because he wants to make some money. And it doesn't preclude him from continuing to use the land for like those agricultural outcomes, like they've still run cattle on the property, et cetera. So, don't know why we got to cut off our nose to spider face, especially when the part that kind of drives me a little bananas actually here is that like ERCOT, like this is super nerdy, but ERCOT, got punched in the face metaphorically a lot around those blackouts in 2021. But they don't really celebrate like some of the things that they're the flip side of that equation associated with this very low regulatory kind of environment is fact. Like they have amazing interconnection capacity and they're able to bring on a lot of these renewables, and they should be touting that as a model for climate. But instead, because they've got this political axe to grind, they're just kind of keeping quiet about it. And that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, you guys are doing something pretty awesome, actually. You should be proud of that. You should be talking about that a lot more, but you're going to have to acknowledge that like renewable energies are kind of the major component, if not the major component of our energy future.
Yeah, I would take that to that into something we talked about last week too, which is that every place is a little different, right? If you're Norway and you have a bunch of hydropower, great, use that. Texas happens to have oil and gas, but it also has a lot of wind and a lot of solar. In other places, you're not going to have those assets. But, in my mind, Texas and also where Heirloom is in Wyoming, if you got an asset that can be leveraged, man, this is capitalism. Go make money on that. And oh, by the way, you're going to assist in national security, our energy security, reducing the price of energy for Americans. And those are all good things. Those things can all happen at the same time. To your point about, grinding a political axe, like let's look at this objectively. I am the first, even though I work in renewable energy, I acknowledge that, the progress that's been made on the back of fossil fuels, but let's also acknowledge in the same breath that the future is an all of the above strategy that incorporates not just oil and gas, but other generation sources too.
Yeah. Well, we're about to interview a friend of yours, a guy named Dave. You want to set up the interview real quick, Neil?
Yeah. So Dave's a super interesting guy. F-111 backseater. I guess it's a Wizzo. I guess they sat side by side. In the Hornet, the Wizzo was in the back, but in the F-111 they sat side by side. And he started his career there, training to deliver nuclear weapons into Russia, and then eventually became an F-16 pilot. And then found himself in this really unique position. He was the base commander at Nellis Air Force Base, just outside of Las Vegas. And Nellis is one of the first producers or builders of a solar project on base. And they saw from that project that you could increase the resilience of the base by having the base have its own energy generation capability. And so that catapulted him into this really unique career where he set up what's called the DoD Clearinghouse. He'll tell us about it, I'm sure. It is the place in the Pentagon where every renewable energy project or energy project near a military base, including transmission lines and other things, does it interfere with military operations or not? And so Dave has helped facilitate the building of a lot of energy projects in and around military facilities because he built this whole process that allows the military to assess whether or not those projects are going to impact military operations or not. And it's a fascinating story. He's a really interesting guy. He's like 5-time Jeopardy winner, in addition to being an Air Force colonel and F-16 pilot. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. My very small connection to it is my Navy Reserve time. I used to train at NOSC Las Vegas and went right by those panels fairly frequently. And I remember thinking, like, man, this is huge. I don't know who did this, but it's on leading edge. So I'm kind of excited to meet Dave and to hear about how that came to be.
All right, I'm joined now by Dave Belote. He is the managing partner and CEO of DARE Strategies. That's a firm that helps clients navigate issues at the nexus of renewable energy and national defense. In 2010, Dave founded the Pentagon's Military Aviation and Installation Assurance Siting Clearinghouse and created the process that allows local officials, industry, and military leaders to assess mission compatibility of a wide range of energy and transmission projects. Dave later served as the vice president for federal business at Apex Clean Energy. He has facilitated the permitting of 36 projects comprising 9.4 gigawatts of wind power while protecting critical military capabilities. Dave is a retired Air Force colonel and F-16 pilot who earned 2 Bronze Stars during Operation Iraqi Freedom and served as commander of Nellis Air Force Base. He was a candidate for the Virginia State Senate. He is also a 5-time Jeopardy champion, which is pretty amazing. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Neil, thanks for having me.
Well, Dave, you and I have known each other for a little bit, but I'd love the audience to get to know you and your background, like all the way back to the beginning. Why did you decide to serve in the military? What got you motivated to fly? And tell us a little bit more about, what brought you into the military and to this point.
Well, dumb luck and fate. You could not have written a script for any aspect of my career. And anytime I've been, had the privilege of giving a leadership talk, I've told everyone, don't spend too much time writing these clear scripts. I've heard various versions of man plans and God laughs. And that's very true in my case. It took me 5 years to get out of the University of Virginia. I had nothing in the background that said I was going into the military. I grew up in Virginia Beach. My dad was a Department of the Navy civilian for 38 years, so I was surrounded by military. But I just thought I was going to do like half the people at UVA. Half are pre-med. I was in the half that's pre-law. And okay, I'll get a law degree. I'll maybe get a MBA, go set the corporate world on fire. And so here I come up summer before my 5th year at UVA, and I'm dating this cute Navy brat, and she suddenly seems to think, all this talk about the Peace Corps and you going and finding yourself, not sure if I'm going to still be around. And so I scratched my head, and I'm thinking deep thoughts. And that day, an Air Force officer recruiter had set up a table at the south end of Mr. Jefferson's lawn at UVA. And he says, hey, come on over, have a chat. And so I didn't know that what I was supposed to do with an Air Force officer recruiter was swagger up and say, I want to fly jets. So he says, well, what would you do if you joined the Air Force? And mind you, this is September of 1984. It is the height of the Reagan buildup. And one of the reasons all of these were open to me was if you could fog a mirror, they would send you to officer training school. And if you had a strong enough pulse, they would consider flight training. So anyway, I didn't know I was supposed to ask for all of this. And he says, what would you do in the Air Force? I said, well, I'm a government and foreign affairs major. I've spent a year studying foreign policy in Germany. That kind of geopolitics fascinates me. How about Intel? And he flips a couple of pages in his book and he says, I'm sorry, there were no iPads in the day. He had, binders to stick. He flips a couple of pages in his binder. Sorry, I don't have any officer accessions for Intel. Oh, okay, thanks. Let's talk. I need to walk away. He goes, well, hey, can you fly? I said, I don't know. I never tried. And the poor guy, Staff Sergeant Terry Alamong, remember him to this day. He's like, man. He flips 2 more pages. He says, can you navigate? And I said, sure. Not realizing that I was volunteering to be a second-class citizen. Well, in hindsight, I probably solved his navigator quota for like the next 18 months. Next thing I knew, there was a stack of papers this thick, first sending me to San Antonio for officer training school, and then out to Sacramento, California for undergraduate navigator training, all to impress a cute Navy brat. Now, good thing the Navy bat's in the next room. Next month we celebrate 39 years of marriage, so that part seemed to have worked out. Uh, but you know, I got in. I went to undergraduate navigator training, did well. Came out at the top of my class and got to fly an F-111. And so there I was in a side by side, 2-seat fighter bomber, doing 600 knots, 200 feet off the ground. I mean, it was pretty fun. And I was contemplating going to law school still. But before the law school application was due, the pilot training application was due. And I'd been watching the dude at my left 9 o'clock for 2 feet going, he's having even more fun than I am. And lo and behold, I put in the pilot training application, was accepted to a specialized program called Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, which guaranteed me a fighter. So I'm like, okay, go fly a 15 or a 16 or go to law school. So the law school application hit the trash can and was never resurrected. And lo and behold, somehow 25 years in uniform, phenomenal experience, and couldn't change it, wouldn't change it for anything.
Well, so that you said 15 or a 16, so that's F-15 or F-16. I want to go back to the F-111 because as a kid growing up, I looked at that airplane. I know a lot of people said it was ugly. I thought it was awesome looking. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about that, the mission of the F-111, what you all trained for?
Well, I was stationed at Lake and Heath, England, and so we had a nuclear mission at the time, which during the Bush presidency, tail end of Reagan-Bush presidency, they started to pull way back on the manned nuclear mission. But I have, touched, the bright, shiny B-61 Silver Bullet. I have seen what we call Dial of Disaster, the little hatch that you opened at the front of the weapon, and you actually chose the megatonnage. But
for the listeners, that's a nuclear weapon. That's a nuclear bomb that you were able to actually turn the dial on, like mechanically turn the dial on. How many? What, kilotons? Megatons?
Megatons.
Megatons.
But you had this, everything was 2-man control. You and, your crewmate were watching each other. You had these very, specialized packets that said, okay, your target is X. All behind what in those days we still called the Iron Curtain. And we would be grilled on every element of our nuclear mission. The bigger part of the mission for the Lake and Heath F-111s was laser-guided bombs. We had this big turret called a PAVTAC pod that rotated out of what had been the weapons bay when they first designed it. And so the weapon systems officer, Wizzo, leaned forward in what we called the feed bag. It came out of the right side of the
I've heard that term, the feed bag.
The feed bag. And so it actually had this little pillow right on top of it that you would lean your helmet against, and you had all of these little knobs, and you're dialing. GPS was not yet a thing, so you were keeping your INS as happy as you could, taking fixes, bringing the navigation solution back. And then, one of the slickest deliveries that we had was called a PAVTAC toss. And so you would be doing either 540 or 600 knots pointed right at the target, and somewhere around 4 to 5 miles away, you would go up into about a 30-degree climb, just fast, as much power as you could, and 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb would come off and just go arcing towards the target, and you would roll 120 to 135 degrees inverted, pull away, and that is keeping this little
Oh, yeah.
with line of sight to the target. And so while the airplane is doing this crazy Hayaka maneuver, the Wizzo is down in the feed bag, finding the target, starting the laser, and you're
trying not to throw up.
Trying not to throw up, guiding the weapon all the way in.
That's pretty cool. As close as I got to a nuclear weapon in the Hornet there was a toggle switch that didn't do anything in the Hornet as far as we were aware. But then when you'd read up on it, it was actually there for some sort of nuclear delivery that we never got to train to or talk about. But yeah, it's amazing to hear, this is the height of the, Mr. Gorbachev tear down that wall time frame, right? This is
exactly.
Wow. All right. So you're in the heart of the action there with the F-111. You go to pilot training. And then what happens when you come out of pilot training?
So I was at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, and got to the end, and they just said, "Okay, no assignments, sit where you are." So I was what they called casual status. I worked in the scheduling shop of one of the fighter training squadrons there, and occasionally I got to get in the back seat of a 16, just to keep a little air under my rear end. And then I finally got an assignment, went to Hill Air Force Base out in Utah, 4th Fighter Squadron, fighting Fujians. That was the only 3-year assignment I ever had. We were there for 3 years and 3 months. And I went from being a, terrible wingman who, couldn't find, his rear end with both hands. And, for those interested in, the learning processes and leadership, I had to unlearn a lot of being a Wizzo. Forget that. Just learn to be a good wingman, stick my airplane where it was supposed to be, do whatever the flight lead said. And the first couple of operations officers, the number 2 in an Air Force fighter squadron, Navy Marines, I think would call it the XO, executive officer. A couple of them, I would say, "Hey, what am I doing wrong?" And they just weren't good at eyeball to eyeball, you kind of feedback. And they say, "You just need a little more experience." And so it was frustrating as hell. Then I finally got a new guy named Jeff Gordon, not the race car driver, but the same name. And he comes in, watches things for 5 or 6 weeks, and he pulls me aside. He goes, "Hey, I see an awful lot of potential. But there's kind of a mindset that you're kind of a B team." And I felt like I had been punched in the stomach, just solar plexus, but looked up, I said, "I know that. And I've been trying to figure out how to fix it." He goes, "All right, we're going to have a little chat about once every month." Says, "I need to see this level of performance for this long. Then you get to become a 2-ship flight lead. For this long, then you're a 4-ship. You do this, and you become an instructor pilot." And I met someone who had the capability of looking me in the eye and giving me, negative but compassionate feedback and giving me a plan. And lo and behold, I was dead last of my peer group of 8 or 10 coming into the squadron after this, enforced layoff. Dead last to become a 2-ship flight lead, and I was the first to become an instructor pilot and flight commander. So with someone who was able to, and so I learned tons of that. And parts of the rest of the story. I became the Air Force's utility infielder for command positions. Didn't command any flying unit, but I commanded the Air Operations Squadron, the Air Operations Center at Ramstein, commanded the 3rd Air Support Operations Group at Fort Hood, all the battlefield airmen attached to 3rd Armored Corps, and then, commanded the 99th Air Base Wing at Nellis, running pretty much the biggest fighter base in the country, out in Las Vegas. And I had learned if somebody is doing something that needs correcting, there's a way to look them in the eye privately. Never call somebody out in public, but, fabulous experience molded by one human being who kind of took me off of one mediocre path and put me on the path that led to 3 consecutive command tours.
So that's super interesting, Dave. What did you do After your command tours, you said a couple of different ones, finalizing with Nellis. What about after that?
Well, I tell people to get a star, I had to retire. And this was another crazy thing that would have never gone forward. While I was at Nellis, I had the good fortune to be introduced to solar energy, renewable energy, as a facet of national security. And again, mostly by historical accident and fate. I took command in May of 2008. And so installation commander of a place like this, I commanded the medical group, the support group, and the security forces group. So it was keep the lights on, the water running, everything necessary. I was essentially the mayor of a couple of small towns. Nellis Air Force Base itself, Creech Air Force Base up in Indian Springs, Nevada, where at the time they had all the ground control stations for Predator and Reaper UAVs, and then also Tonopah Test Range Airfield up in the northwestern corner of the range, where now we can say it's where the F-117 stealth fighter flew out of, and where they are in warm storage even to this day. And then I had installation command authority over the entire 2.9 million acres of the Nevada Test and Training Range.
Wow.
I did not have installation command authority of a little container right in the middle of the Nevada Test and Training Range, which when I retired, I was not allowed to say this in public. Now I can say the words Area 51 because they were declassified.
Mm-hmm.
But
so are there aliens there or not?
Well, I never dealt with the aliens. I dealt with the aliens' handlers. And when the aliens' handlers said the aliens want strawberry ice cream, I left strawberry ice cream on the doorstep. That was as far as it went.
Okay. All right. I know enough to not ask any further questions.
He's alien DoorDash.
There you go. I used that very line at a clean energy summit hosted by Harry Reid in Las Vegas, I think in early 2010. And as I made my little crack about the aliens and strawberry ice cream, I swear I saw 4 or 5, notebooks come out and people start scribbling. And I had this vision of appearing on some crazy blog. Nellis commander admits aliens in desert and they like strawberry ice cream. So I was careful about using that in the future. But that unique thing of me being the public face of anything that had to happen in there was what led to all of this. First, Barack Obama flies out to spend Memorial Day weekend of 2009, and he was coming out to do a fundraiser at Caesar's Palace for Harry Reid, who was in a pretty difficult re-election battle at the time. But he wanted to have a tour of Nellis, and he wanted to give a 100-day update speech in the Thunderbird hangar at Nellis. And so, again, all of the crazy little things that happen that put you in various places. I'm speaking to the White House advance team, and they say, hey, we would really like to use your Command Chief Master Sergeant, Rob Brooks, to host the president. And Rob looked, and to this day, I see him on Facebook, he still looks like G.I. Joe. The dude is ripped. He was straight out of Central Casting, just high and tight, crew cut, and a great guy. They said, we'd like Chief Master Sergeant Brooks. And I said, I can't envision many times when I would say no to the White House, but Chief Brooks is other side of the country at Joint Base McGuire. He is in preparation to deploy to Afghanistan, and I can't yank him from pre-deployment preparation, to host the president. And there's this kind of from the other end of the phone, I imagine, this, person wasn't used to being told no about anything. They said, well, we've read your bio, you'll do. So I end up hosting Barack Obama and Harry Reid, around Nellis at the time had the largest solar photovoltaic array on the continent. 2007, Nellis commissioned a 14 megawatt array back in a day when about a 500 kilowatt array was considered huge. And so In 2007, Nellis started producing 25 to 30% of its power by the sun. A couple of years after I left, they built an equally sized array off the south end of the runway. And so to this day, Nellis gets 50% of its power from the sun. And the president wanted to see this. And so I, take President Barack Obama up and down the solar panels. And there is one picture that still exists in B-roll with me holding my left hand, and I'm pointing to the north, and the president is looking at me, and I'm saying something to the effect of, Mr. President, 50 miles to the north, you have the Nevada Test and Training Range, probably the most advanced, sophisticated test and training range, definitely in the country, probably in the world. I said, and right here, we're producing most or a big chunk of our power from the sun. So we recognize that energy independence and military readiness are co-equal facets of national security. And he's like, man, it's so good to hear you say this. And, we riffed on it a little bit, and, he was absolutely gracious, fascinating. I was going to be, I had a couple of, security forces ready to pick me up when this tour was going to be done and take me to the next thing, which was his speech. And we stepped towards the car, and he says, well, all right, thank you for this. It's time to get to the next event. And had those words come from a 3 or a 4-star whom I hosted all the time at Nellis, it would have also meant, you're dismissed, Colonel. And so that's how I took it. And I said, well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And I took a step back, and I looked over my shoulder, made eye contact with, Staff Sergeant Jones, who's going to pick me up. And President Obama looks over, he says, Colonel Belote, get in the car. So I stepped into the beast with, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and President Barack Obama, gave him the windshield tour of Nellis, talked about the combined Air Force VA hospital. And, he spoke about how Michelle Obama was focused on, veterans and military family needs. He explained to me how he chose Marine General Jim Jones as his national security advisor. And in years later, when I'd give leadership talks, I'd say, hey, folks, if anybody who works for you asks you a question about your thought process, take the time, not, at midnight during an exercise under simulated attack, but take the time to explain it. Said, who do you think the highest person in the military chain of command that ever explained his thought processes to me? The 4-star at Air Combat Command, higher. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, higher. Well, who's higher than that? The president. Took, 45 seconds or a minute to just explain why a retired Marine 4-star had the breadth, and that was also a big chunk of energy and energy security factoring into national security. And he said, he could explain things to me that I had no understanding about how the military works, and he was invaluable in that role. So just, total fascination. And because of that, my picture is associated with the Nellis solar array. And because of that, I am erroneously given credit for any of the thought process behind it. All that credit should go to a woman named Michelle Price, who was the base energy manager in 2006, 2007. My predecessor and I did what, decent commanders do, heard a good idea, gave her some resources, and got the hell out of the way. And that's why, Nellis ended up in this leadership role in, behind the fence energy generation. And, we used to call it base energy resilience. The current administration talks about lethality and readiness, but solar energy is a huge part of the lethality and readiness of Nellis Air Force Base. And, the Air Force, I'm very proud, led the way. And because of my picture, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, invited me to be on a panel with T. Boone Pickens in Phoenix. Oh, this would have been fall of 2009. And So once again, and I never ever, I swear, never take credit for something one of your folks can do. So I told the story about Michelle Price and how, good ideas just came along. And then the other unique thing that, got me into this, renewable energy bit, because I had the installation command authority for everything around Area 51. All of a sudden, a outfit called Solar Reserve wanted to build a sophisticated energy project, a molten salt solar collector. So 800-foot tower, 20,000 or so heliostat mirrors focusing the sun's rays on this. And I think it was potassium iodide. They heat it to 1,200 degrees, and they keep this 1,200-degree molten salt in a liquid state, semi-buried, and then they would run that through steam turbines and produce energy. So they're, hey, we want to come out and build this, and they put their finger on a spot just a couple of miles from Tonopah. And I said, it looks absolutely fascinating. I think that the idea of generating solar power 24 hours a day is brilliant. I said, but the aliens wouldn't like it if you put it there. And they're like, okay. And so now it would melt their ice cream. And, in truth, there are incredibly sophisticated sensors all over the Nevada Test and Training Desert, all over the Nevada desert. And it's where, we determine the radar signature of everything in our inventory, and tactics and techniques that will allow, aircraft to make it through air defense networks. And so, yes, 35 to 50 miles away, a 800-foot tower could have enough of an electromagnetic signature to spoil some of this test capability. So that was really, what things were all about. So because I didn't work back behind, that line on the map, I was the face of these negotiations. And we actually found a site about 50 miles away, where the brilliant folks said, all right, there is, radar wave propagation over terrain, and there is attenuation. And remembering that I'm a government and foreign affairs major, not a scientist, I could kind of keep track with what was going on. But we got to yes. And so fast forward to my papers are in, I had a realistic shot at, getting promoted to general, but I didn't. And my wife and I say, all right, it's time to go out on top. I cannot imagine, a job better than, being, the mayor of Fightertown. And so, Christmas of 2009, before I'm going to retire in March of 2010, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment calls me up and says, Dave, do you realize, well, first she says, understand your papers are in. And I was taken aback, but I kind of chuckled. I said, ma'am, not too many people know that, but I can understand how you would be in a position to know. She says, do you realize you're the first person who ever got to yes, citing a sophisticated energy project close to a sensitive military facility? And I shrugged my shoulders. I said, I was just trying to do my job and be an honest broker and weigh the things she told me. She says, I want you to come to the Pentagon and do renewable energy siting policy. And I said, man, with all the courtesy that I can muster, no, there is no way that the first job I have after taking off the uniform is going to be back in a Pentagon cubicle. And she says, I hear that from time to time, especially from fighter jockeys and, folks like you. Don't lose my number. Let's stay in touch. All right. So fast forward to my, I've had, I think 16 informational interviews with folks in the renewable energy industry, renewable energy finance. Neil, you lived this life, separating from the Marines and getting into the private sector. And to a man and a woman, every single one of them says, your resume just screams strategic thinking and executive leadership. Said, but you can't spell P&L. And until you can prove to somebody in, business that you understand profit and loss and making payroll, there's no way you are going to get a job at the level, that you have shown in Nellis. And so I can understand that. And then the terminal leave runs out, and my wife says, and terminal leave runs out, and the six-figure check I had from Alex Trebek for the Tournament of Champions was running out, and she says, "Take the damn Pentagon job." And so, again, one of these crazy things that you can't make up. I am in Yankee Stadium, the first game after George Steinbrenner has passed away. It is all done in black bunting. Mariano Rivera and Derek Jeter are down on home plate laying a black rose. And I had been in New York visiting a good friend and, doing a couple of these informational interviews. And back my BlackBerry buzzes, and it is, Dr. Dorothy Robine, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. And she says, "Dave, we have worked out all of the personnel issues. We have created the billet. It is yours if you say yes." And I can't believe the timing. And I said, "Dr. Robine, yes, ma'am, I'll take the job." So suddenly, this is mid-July of 2010. And there I am heading back to the Pentagon to determine renewable energy siting policy for, the Office of the SecDef. Well, in my day, we simply called it the Energy Siting Clearinghouse. 2017, in one of the times that Congress jumped in, they decided to give it a much longer name, as you put in the lead off: Military Aviation and Installation Assurance, Siting Clearinghouse. But it's still just the clearinghouse. It reports to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy and Environmental Compliance, who reports to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy Installations and Environment. And so we've got to figure out when there is a military issue, a military impact from wind turbines or solar panels. So for about 6 months, I was cruising around just trying to, think of what all of these different factors were. And so I came at it from a, installation command and, fighter pilot background. And so we figured out, well, if you put wind turbines inside low-level military training airspace, that'll create obstructions that folks will have to fly around. If you put them close to radars, that will create electromagnetic interference. And so we created a set of policies, and we created a review process that's tied to the FAA's obstruction evaluation process. And so anytime a wind developer files an application to build anything over 200 feet, DoD gets notified. Then it goes to the clearinghouse, who farms it out to the airspace review offices of all the services. So each of the services has to say to the FAA, "We don't object to this project." And then the clearinghouse itself, working in the Office of the SecDef, they're the goalie. And so they make sure that nothing slips through. And so we created that process that has worked pretty much the same way to this day. So that's what the clearinghouse is all about, is making sure that those twin pillars of national security, military readiness and, energy independence, that they are complementary rather than at odds. Well, as we are learning now, it depends on the policies of whomever's in the White House. It has always been focused on maybe 5%, and DoD has always acknowledged openly that, there are three things at play. There's the military mission. There is the need for all of the above energy. Because coal and gas, as much as people want to believe it just won't keep up with demands today posed by data centers, advanced manufacturing, you name it. And there's also, you and I both swore an oath to the Constitution. There is the constitutional principle of a taking. Just because we fly over somebody's ranch or farm doesn't say that the federal government should come in and say, you can't build what you want on your own property. And so, I actually, it's 6 or 8 years ago, but supplied a white paper to a right-leaning, libertarian group about the property rights issues involved in the Clearinghouse and how careful you had to be, not to be telling people on the ground. And today, you discover that wind farms are keeping some family ranches and farms alive because a wind turbine, a single wind turbine will guarantee, $20,000 to $30,000 in royalty payments to that landowner. And after the wind farm has been built and the construction roads have been plowed back over, that ranch or farm only loses about a half an acre to an individual wind turbine. And so, wind farms are allowing ranchers in Texas and Oklahoma to draw $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in passive income a year while still grazing or, planting whatever they are. I was at a wind farm ribbon cutting ceremony in Edenton, North Carolina just last summer. And one of the landowners stood up and says, hey, I am the Republican vice chair of the school board, and I can't tell you how much good this wind farm has done for Chowan County, North Carolina. And, for my farm in particular, the income is going to keep my farm running, and the tax payments that the wind turbines generate are going to build a high school and a middle school for Chowan County, roughly $33 million over the next 20 to 25 years. So it was just a win-win-win situation. And this is a Republican elected official standing up, talking about how good this wind farm is. So those are the issues that DoD has always looked at. And historically, it's only been about 5% of the time that DoD has come and said, look, that project is really, really going to mess things up.
So one of the things I was going to say is I like to talk about like false choices. And in fact, sometimes we try to say it can either be A or it can be B, but we can't do both. And so like, as you were talking about that county commissioner and about like rural economies, about like that they can both site, wind turbines and also be able to do, through traditional agricultural lifestyle. Like that highlights to me about like that we shouldn't be engaging in false choices. To take that a step further here, it sounds like you've been able to kind of compromise and work through some of like the negative parts of like how do these things affect national security. But maybe you could talk about the positive parts, like why anybody should care about national security and like renewable energy.
I would say because once you've built it, it's logistics free. And if you have it behind the fence of a military installation, then you have a generation source, let's say solar panels and batteries behind the fence. If the bad guys bring down the grid, you can keep the critical facilities on that military base operational. I mentioned earlier that part of my installation command authority was Beach Air Force Base out in Indian Springs, Nevada. And that, this was 2009, 2010. So every Predator or Reaper that was flying over Iraq, Afghanistan, or Somalia was being controlled out of Indian Springs, Nevada. And a lightly armed Boy Scout troop with Leatherman tools and baseball bats, if they'd have known exactly where to jump the fence and run, they could have probably brought down the power sources to those things and crippled that option. Air Combat Command had, I think, 12 critical single point failures in their mission, and I had 6 of them at Crete. And the The engineers told me, okay, we've got these diesel gensets, and we've got maybe a 0.7 to 0.8 probability that we could keep things up and running for more than 6 days. And I'm, thinking as a commander, okay, that just doesn't cut it. And so that, I had the solar on Nellis, and I started realizing, hey, if you had solar at Creech plus a battery to keep things going, you have just created a capability of, mission lethality, mission readiness that you're not going to be anywhere. On the deployable side, I spent 6 months in Baghdad as the commander of the Expeditionary Air Support Operations Group and the Corps Commanding General's Air Liaison Officer. Was there for the Second Battle of Fallujah, was actually in Fallujah with a Marine named Static Kling, giving the ALO JTAC fact coordination brief before the heroes went over the berm into Fallujah. And we were there for the first set of Iraqi elections where they elected a constitutional convention. And the hardest thing to do was transport petroleum across the battle space to fill these diesel gensets that kept all of these forward operating locations going. So if, again, you were able to containerize solar or small-scale wind and put those on forward operating bases, then you get soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians completely out of the business of driving big petroleum convoys across contested battle space and getting shot at. So once it's there, it's logistics free. So on both sides, the installation, readiness and lethality, and the forward operating location point of the spear, readiness and lethality, solar, small scale wind, geothermal, if we get to a point where you can, dig on your installation, it is a win-win solution. Again, we're not allowed to say wind energy or renewable energy in the halls of the Pentagon right now, but logistics-free energy, come on. We need it. And it is part of all of the above, all of the above scenario that just leads to American power.
Across your career, also your experience building this clearinghouse, which enables what I just described, I think really amazing. Curious what you're reading right now.
Of all the crazy things, I just finished Lonesome Dove. Larry McMurtry, 40-year-old novel. It was fascinating. I loved it, just the sweep of that story. And, one of the notes that you sent me in preparation, you said, what is your favorite? If anybody wants to go find an old, phenomenal novel, my favorite book of all time, it's called Once an Eagle. It is a historical novel written in the late 60s, early 70s by a guy named Anton Myrer, Myrer. And it takes a Nebraska farm boy in 1917, 1918. He is drafted. He goes to France to fight World War I, earns a battlefield commission for heroism, and then goes from World War I all the way through the early days of Vietnam in the U.S. Army. And it is not only that historical sweep of America in those days, it is a tremendous character study and leadership study, because every step of the way he is one step behind. Sam Damon is the good guy. He is one step behind a butt-kissing sycophant named Courtney Massengill, who was everything that is wrong in the leaders that the military sometimes produces that shouldn't be there. And so you see, this constant flux of someone who's in it for himself and stepping on people, and someone who's about the mission and the people around him. When I was in Baghdad, I ordered, or when I became a group commander and a squadron commander, I ordered copies, and you can get them, I think, through Army War College. Ordered copies and gave them to all of my senior leaders and senior enlisted. And the favor got returned on Christmas of 2004, standing in Camp Victory in Baghdad. My guys and gals had found an original copy, a subject copy, and gave it to me And so Once an Eagle, I can't recommend it highly enough if you're interested in that historical sweep, military history, and that leadership character study.
Wow. Okay. I have not read it, but I'm going to check it out, especially with that endorsement. That sounds right up my alley.
800 or 900 pages. So devote some, set aside some time.
Okay. Check. Well, Dave, from Aardvark Wizzo, appreciate the stories about preparing for nuclear war, transitioned F-16 pilot to building the Clearinghouse, which has enabled the building of greater energy capacity, which significantly enhances our national security. Quite a career, and really appreciate you drawing the insights of how that process works and how we can utilize it moving forward. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Mike. Great to meet you, and I look forward to hearing the podcast as it moves along.
Good to see you, Dave.
All right. Well, that was a fascinating interview with Dave Belote. Really appreciate him coming on and taken again by, he was right in the middle of the action flying F-111 Aardvarks, which just happens to be one of my favorite airplanes. When I was growing up, it had those swept wings and this really sort of ugly pointed nose, and you could tell it was super fast. And then as I learned about that airplane later on, I was just fascinated by the mission, and Dave was right in the middle of it. He was training to launch nuclear weapons into Russia, flying out of Lake Neath, England. But anyway, then he goes on to be a central player in bringing, new energy projects to life, by establishing the Clearinghouse. Just fascinating. And I think I'm grateful for his, his work in that, but also shedding light on, how, that whole project was built and implemented. So pretty fascinating.
I really liked him. I also really like his leadership style. I thought he was man enough to let somebody else have the spotlight when he was talking about to the president of the United States and to other people about how that project on Nellis got developed. It wasn't him. He talked about this woman named Michelle, right? Some government staffer that is unheralded, nobody probably ever would have heard of her or known about her. And he was man enough to know, I can share the spotlight. I think that's kind of the sign of a true leader.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. He also mentioned, sort of a key lesson learned for him was somebody being able to deliver him hard feedback, behind the, not in public, but giving feedback in a direct but kind way. And that he learned from that. He went from being sort of last or bottom rung of the new pilots in his squadron to being one of the best. And because he was able to get that feedback and then he was able to implement that moving forward, that was also pretty fascinating.
If only I'd known that, maybe I wouldn't have been such a terrible pilot. Anyways, on to goods, bads, and others today. So I think I'll start today. The goods that I'm hearing actually is that according to some reporting in Bloomberg, we talked about it on a previous episode about carbon pricing associated with the emissions from international shipping. And the negotiations went on and they actually agreed without the U.S. So really positive development from a climate perspective. It's 4 to 5% of the world's emissions come from shipping. And the organization that was doing the negotiating put it together and figured out a way to come up with an internal price of carbon. Not so great for that the U.S. dealt itself out of being part of the future, but from a climate perspective, I'm stoked. So that's my good. My other is that green bonds are on the way down. So for those unfamiliar, you can issue debt to be repaid. That's a bond. A lot of people and organizations, governments, large corporations will issue bonds in order to be able to finance project development, for example. And historically, a lot of those have been done by green bonds. If it was around renewable energy, for example, there. The U.S., because of what we heard in the interview there, the U.S. is having to be very careful about the language it uses. And so green bonds are kind of disappearing within the U.S. language. But nonetheless, global leaders in green bonds are starting to be China and Europe. So again, kind of one of those, the U.S. is dealing itself out of the future. That's a bad for me. And then my son starts flag football tonight. He's been mostly an individual sport kind of guy. So I'm keeping an eye on to see how much he's going to be paying attention to everybody else around him, or if he's going to be kind of doing his own thing. I'm excited though for him, because like he said this is what he wanted to do. You know, he's leaning into it. So I have optimism, but I'm going to keep my eye on what's happening here.
Okay. Good to go.
Yeah.
I can understand that as a dad. That's one of those moments where you gotta you sort of grab your popcorn and see what happens, right?
That's right. So I got faith in the kid, but it's going to be a little bit of a transition.
Yeah, for sure. For my goods, bads, and others, I'm going to stay on the tariff topic, because I know we've talked about that over the last several episodes. But from my perspective, I want to stay on the good here, that we are on a pause, that there have been, stabilizing announcements, that it appears the president has listened to some of his advisors and is taking a more measured approach to tariffs. So I'm encouraged by that, and I want to give credit where credit's due. The initial announcements were, I think, reckless, but we all make mistakes, and if he can correct course and put us on a more stable path, I want to acknowledge that. My bad, though, I was in Phoenix over the weekend and took the family to eat on Saturday night, and we were at a college bar, and the fight was on. Fights, I should say. UFC was on. And, I'm not generally a big fight fan, but, I watch it from time to time, and was actually enjoying watching some of the fights. And then in the middle of it, I'm just watching a sporting event. In the middle of it, the camera pans to 4 politicians. Tulsi Gabbard's in the crowd. Robert F. Kennedy's in the crowd. Marco Rubio's in the crowd. And I just can't, I don't understand why we have to make a fight a political event. So my bad is just, when I'm watching football or basketball or a fight, even if I don't watch fights that often, can we just keep politics out of it? And my other is, NEMA just released a report saying that load growth is expanding even faster than previously thought, that the data centers are going to grow by 300% in the next 10 years. And this is partially the AI piece, et cetera. But look, it's just, a report like this came out about 3 months ago, and this is even more growth than we predicted 3 months ago. So definitely something to keep an eye on. The world needs more energy. The United States needs more energy. We know that. We're, as a national security issue, we're working to keep up with that. But as it keeps accelerating, as we keep needing more energy, that challenge gets harder and harder. So something I want to keep an eye on.
That's going to affect our future in so many ways: national security, climate, the way that our world works, literally, as AI kind of is rapidly getting inserted in everything. That's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think that's it for our show today, Neil. You want to go ahead and read us out?
All right. That's it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and being a part of this conversation around energy, security, and the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought-provoking, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling generous, share it on social media or send it to someone who'd appreciate the signal through the noise. Thank you to Dave Belote for joining us, and Hardpoints is produced by Jordan Garuso and brought to you by the Valor Media Network.